They called her the untamable one. Everyone in the colony knew her name, though no one dared speak it too loudly. She was tall, her skin marked with strange glowing patterns that looked like fire in the dark, and her eyes carried a cold, dangerous shine. She had been captured more than once, but never held for long. Metal chains could not keep her, for she broke them like brittle twigs. Electric locks failed, for she tore them apart with her raw strength. Even the strongest guards, men and women trained to control violent aliens, stepped back when she growled. She was not just wild, she was feared. Parents warned their children not to whisper her name at night. Traders in the market lowered their voices when they spoke about her. She had attacked patrols, raided supply convoys, and even escaped the laboratory where scientists tried to study her blood. No one could predict where she would appear or who would suffer next. She was like a storm that came without warning, leaving destruction behind. But on one stormy evening, something changed. She had been running again, fleeing from armed hunters who carried nets and shock rifles. They had chased her through the industrial blocks, past glowing towers and broken roads, determined to end her reign of fear once and for all. Blasts echoed in the night, bright sparks lighting up her body as she leapt from wall to wall, dodging their fire. But even the strongest can bleed. A shot caught her side. She stumbled. For the first time, she felt weakness. She dragged herself through the dark, leaving faint drops of glowing blood behind her. Her legs shook, her breaths came heavy, and for the first time in years, she did not know if she could keep running. She broke through a broken fence and crossed into the human sector of the colony. It was quiet there. Houses stood in neat rows, dim lights glowing behind windows, children already asleep. She staggered between the shadows, clutching her wound, when suddenly she stopped. A figure stood in her way. Not a soldier, not a hunter, just a human man, standing outside a small shelter with a lantern in his hand. His face was calm, almost too calm. She expected him to scream or run like the others always did. Instead, he looked at her, eyes steady, no fear in them. The untamable one bared her teeth, her body tense, ready to strike. Blood dripped from her side, but she raised her claws anyway. No one had ever dared to face her alone. Then he spoke a single word. Stop. It was not shouted like a command. It was not weak like a plea. It was firm, steady, quiet, as if he truly believed she would listen. She froze. Her claws trembled in the air, her breathing sharp and heavy. She did not understand why her body listened when her mind screamed to attack. For the first time in her wild, violent life, someone had stopped her not with chains, not with weapons, but with a voice. The hunters' lights still glowed in the distance, searching. She could hear their boots striking metal and the sound of their scanners. She turned her head toward the noise, then back to the human. He was still there, not moving, not running, his lantern casting soft light across his face. His clothes were plain, his hands unarmed. She wondered if he was mad, or if he had some hidden trick. But the way he looked at her, like she was not a beast, made her heart pound in a way she had never felt before. Her knees weakened and she swayed. The wound in her side burned hotter, and darkness pushed at the edges of her vision. She wanted to roar, to strike, to prove she was still fierce. Instead, she stumbled forward, her body failing her. To her shock, the human stepped forward, not back. He caught her before she hit the ground. His arms were not strong compared to hers, but they were steady. He lowered her gently to the earth, his lantern beside them, its glow spreading across her face. She tried to push him away. Her pride screamed at her. She was the untamable one. She needed no help. But her arms felt heavy, her claws dull, her breath short. She could not move. She expected him to drag her out into the street for the hunters to find. That was what humans always did. Instead, he lifted her with effort, his body straining, and carried her toward his shelter. Her head rested against his chest, and she could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. The sound confused her. No fear, no panic, just calm determination. She had faced soldiers, scientists, leaders, and killers. None of them had ever made her feel like this, like she was not a monster, but something worth saving. Inside the shelter, he placed her on a bed, his hands quick and careful as he tore cloth to press against her wound. She hissed, baring her teeth again, but he did not flinch. He met her eyes and said softly, "You'll live." His voice carried certainty, as if he had already decided her fate, and she could not fight against it. Her body gave in to exhaustion. The fire in her veins cooled, her eyelids heavy, and before sleep claimed her, she thought of one thing. Out there, the colony called her a beast, untamable and wild. Yet this human, this strange, fearless man, had looked into her eyes and spoken to her like she was more than that. She did not know his name. She did not know why he helped her. But as darkness closed in, one thought burned brighter than her pain. Perhaps chains and cages had never been the test. Perhaps this human was. The night was silent inside the human shelter. The storm outside rattled the walls, but inside there was only the sound of her breathing, heavy and restless. She lay on the bed, her wound covered with rough cloth, the strange glowing blood now hidden under layers of bandage. She hated feeling weak. Her kind were not meant to lie still. They were meant to fight, to hunt, to roar against the world. Yet here she was, in the house of a human, unable to move without pain. The man sat across the room, quietly working with tools on a broken lantern. He did not watch her like a guard. He did not tie her down with chains. He simply gave her space, as if she was no more dangerous than a sleeping cat. It confused her. Most humans shook when she came near. Their voices rose, their hands reached for weapons. But this one moved slowly, calmly, as though nothing about her frightened him. She wanted to hate him for it, but she could not. When the first light of morning touched the window, she tried to leave. Her pride demanded it. She pushed herself up, ignoring the sharp pain in her side, and staggered toward the door. Her claws brushed the handle when his voice stopped her again. "You'll bleed out if you walk away now." His tone was not commanding, not begging, just steady. She hissed back, showing her teeth, but her legs betrayed her. She collapsed against the doorframe. He was already there, catching her before she hit the ground. He carried her back to the bed, setting her down gently, as if she was not a monster, but something fragile. That made her angrier than chains ever had. "Why?" she spat, her voice rough and full of suspicion. He did not answer right away. He simply adjusted the bandage, checked the wound, and then finally said, "Because you're alive." Alive. The word rang in her ears. To the colony, she was a problem, a weapon, a creature to be caged or destroyed. No one had ever said it so simply before. She stared at him, searching for the trick, the trap behind his words. But his eyes showed no lies. He meant it. Later that day, he gave her food. Not the nutrient paste soldiers used to feed prisoners. Real food. Bread, still warm, and a bowl of stew that filled the air with a rich smell. He placed it on the table near her and stepped back. She narrowed her eyes, waiting for poison or mockery. When nothing happened, she finally snatched it up, eating with sharp, fast bites, as though he might take it away. But he didn't. He only watched quietly, then returned to fixing his lantern. She finished the food quickly, licking her fingers without shame. Her eyes darted toward him, half expecting laughter, but he didn't even look at her. The silence felt heavier than words. She did not know why it bothered her. That night, her body was stronger, her wound less painful. She decided to test him. She rose when he wasn't watching, picked up a piece of wood from the corner, and hurled it across the room. It struck the wall, breaking into splinters. The man turned, saw the damage, and sighed. Then he went to fetch another piece of wood, replacing the one she had destroyed. No anger, no shouting, just quiet patience. She tried again, pushing harder. She found a sharp knife in his kitchen and held it up, pointing the blade at him. Her eyes narrowed, daring him to show fear. But he didn't. He continued repairing his lantern, his voice calm as ever. "If you want to kill me, do it. But if you don't, sit down. You're still healing." The knife trembled in her hand. She could not explain the tightness in her chest. Any other human would have begged for life or drawn a weapon. This one treated her like she was more than her claws. With a frustrated growl, she dropped the knife onto the floor and turned her back to him. Days passed in this strange rhythm. She would test him, trying to see if he would break. She broke a chair. He repaired it. She shouted and cursed in her alien tongue. He let her finish, then spoke gently. She threatened him with her strength. He never once lifted a hand against her. It was not weakness. She could sense that. It was something else, something harder to understand. The leaders of the human colony soon discovered she was hiding there. They came to his shelter, their boots heavy on the ground, their voices sharp with fear. "Hand her over," they demanded. "She's dangerous. She's killed before. She cannot stay here." She waited for him to betray her, to open the door and throw her out. But instead, he stood tall, blocking the entrance with his body. "She stays," he said. The leaders shouted, threatened, even promised him safety if he obeyed. But he did not move. "She is not a monster," he added, his voice steady. "Not here." The alien woman, hidden behind the wall, listened with wide eyes. No one had ever spoken those words for her. Not her people, not the scientists, not the soldiers. Only this human. When the leaders left, angry and defeated, she looked at him in silence. Her pride told her to mock him, to say he was a fool. But deep inside, something else stirred. She could not name it yet. It was not fear, not anger, not hunger. It was something different, something that made her chest feel heavy and her throat tight. That night, she sat near the fire while he cooked again. She watched the flames dance, the smell of stew filling the air. He worked quietly, humming to himself. She wanted to speak, to ask why he risked so much for her. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she only stared at him, her glowing eyes softer than before. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like a prisoner. She did not feel like a beast. She felt something she could not explain, sitting in a human shelter, guarded not by chains, but by trust. The morning came with soft light through the cracks in the shelter's wall, but her mind was already awake long before the sun. She had been staring at the ceiling, her thoughts twisting like fire in her chest. The human had not locked her in. His door stood unbarred. His tools lay open. Even a small blade rested on the table near her. No chains, no guards, nothing. Was this kindness, or was it a test? She rose slowly, her wound aching less now. Her glowing eyes moved to the knife. She picked it up, its edge catching the light, and held it in her hand. She walked toward him where he was fixing something near the fireplace. The blade hovered close, and for a heartbeat, she thought of plunging it into his back. That would prove who she was, the untamable one, feared across the colony. Yet something inside her hesitated. She tightened her grip, but her arm would not move. The human turned his head slightly, noticing her shadow on the floor. He saw the knife, her stance, her sharp breath. But instead of fear, instead of rushing for a weapon, he only said, "If you want to test me, then finish it. But I won't stop you." His voice was steady, quiet, without anger. She froze. No one had ever spoken like that to her. Not begging, not commanding, simply accepting. With a frustrated growl, she threw the knife down. It clattered on the ground, the sound echoing in the silence. He only bent, picked it up, and placed it back on the table. No anger. No punishment. Just a small shake of his head as he continued his work. She felt her chest burning, but not from hate. It was confusion, a kind she hated even more. Later that day, she tried another way. She kicked over his tools, spilling screws and pieces across the floor. He simply knelt, gathering them one by one, patient as stone. She smashed a chair against the wall. He looked at the broken wood, sighed, and said, "I'll fix it later." She shouted at him in her language, words sharp and cutting, insults that had made soldiers tremble before. But he did not answer with rage. He let her finish, then quietly asked, "Are you done?" The calmness in his tone pierced her anger deeper than any chain could. The human leaders came again in the afternoon. Their boots struck the ground like thunder, their voices carrying anger and fear. They had seen her shadow through the window. They knew she was inside. "She cannot stay," one of them said, his hand gripping a weapon. "She's killed before. She's too dangerous. Hand her over." The alien woman listened from the shadows, her claws ready. She expected betrayal. She expected him to move aside and let them drag her away. That was what anyone would do. But the human stepped forward, standing in the doorway with his arms out. "She stays," he said firmly. "She's not one of us," another shouted. "She's a beast, a danger to every man, woman, and child here." The human's eyes did not waver. "She is not a monster," he replied. His voice was calm, but it carried steel. "She is hurt, she is alive, and she is under my roof. That is enough." The leaders threatened him. They said they would cut off his supplies, mark his name with shame, leave him without protection if he refused. But he did not move. He stood like a wall, not bending, not breaking. Finally, with curses and anger, they left, promising to return. She sat in the dark corner, staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes. Why? Why had he risked himself for her? She had brought him nothing but trouble. She had broken his furniture, shouted in his face, threatened his life. And yet, when his own people demanded her, he had chosen her instead of them. The thought twisted inside her chest, sharp and painful, like a wound she could not heal. That night, the fire burned low in the hearth. She sat across from him, her eyes fixed on the flames, her body tense. He cooked food again, the smell filling the room, and then set a bowl in front of her without a word. She picked it up, her hands shaking slightly, though she did not understand why. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "You are a fool, human. Do you not fear me? Do you not fear what I will do?" He looked at her across the fire. "If you wanted me dead, I would be dead already." His tone was simple, calm, as if he was stating a fact, not an opinion. "But you're still here." She had no answer. She stared into the fire, the heat reflecting in her glowing eyes. Something was changing inside her, something she could not control. She did not like it, yet she could not stop it. Later, when he slept, she watched him. He lay with his back turned, no lock on his door, no weapon at his side. Vulnerable, unprotected. She could end him in a heartbeat, claim her freedom, vanish into the night. But she didn't. Instead, she sat in the corner, silent, guarding the shelter as if it was her own. Every sound outside made her ears twitch. Every shadow made her claws flex, ready to fight, not against him, but for him. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like a prisoner, nor like a beast. She felt caught between two worlds. Her old self, fierce and untamable, and this strange new pull she did not understand. The human had not chained her, yet she did not leave. The door was open, yet she did not walk through it. By the time dawn came again, she realized something that shook her to her core. She was not testing him anymore. She was testing herself. Days turned into weeks, and the shelter no longer felt like a cage to her. The wound in her side healed slowly under the human's careful hands. Every time he cleaned it, every time he changed the cloth, she expected pain or cruelty, but he was always gentle. His touch was steady, his eyes calm, and she hated how it made her heart beat faster. She was not supposed to feel this way. She was the fiercest of her kind, feared across the colony. Yet here she sat, allowing a human to treat her like she was something more than a weapon. She began to notice things she had never cared about before. He tended to a small garden behind the shelter, where green plants pushed through the soil. He spoke to them in a soft voice, almost like they were living beings that understood him. She thought it was foolish, yet she found herself watching from the window. She watched the way his hands brushed the leaves, the way his lips moved in quiet words she could not always hear, and it made her wonder, how could someone so fragile, someone who lived with plants and tools, stand against hunters and leaders for her? One night, the wind outside howled through the cracks in the walls. She could not sleep. Her instincts kept her alert, ears sharp for danger. But when she turned, she saw him lying there, sleeping so peacefully. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, his face relaxed, unguarded. She found herself staring too long. She told herself it was only because he had left the door unlocked again, but deep down, she knew it was something else. The sound of his breathing was strangely comforting, and against her will, her body relaxed too. Slowly, without realizing it, she began to help him. At first, it was small things. She would lift heavy crates when she saw him struggle. She would fetch water before he asked. She told herself it was only because she hated seeing weakness, but the truth was she liked the way his eyes softened when he looked at her after. He never said thank you in grand words. He only gave a small nod, sometimes a quiet smile, and that was enough to make her chest chill strange. One afternoon, a group of children wandered near the shelter. They pointed and whispered when they saw her glowing eyes through the crack of the door. She had scared children before. She had heard their cries of fear, but this time it felt different. She almost stepped out to show her teeth, to remind them who she was. But then the human appeared behind her, placing a hand lightly on her arm. "Let them be," he said softly. His touch was warm, not forceful, but enough to calm her anger. She turned back inside, confused by how easily he controlled the fire inside her. She began to fight with herself. Every night, her thoughts twisted. Why did she care about him? Why did she feel this need to stay close, to listen to his voice, to protect his shelter? She had spent her whole life being untamed, wild, unbroken. Now, a single human had placed a quiet chain around her heart, and she had let him. She did not know if it was weakness or something else entirely. The turning point came when a storm hit the colony. The winds tore at the roofs, the rain flooded the streets, and the shelter shook under the force. The human rushed to save what he could: his garden, his tools, the lanterns. She saw him struggle against the storm, his small body fighting forces much greater than him. Something inside her snapped. Without thinking, she rushed outside, standing tall against the rain, her strength cutting through the chaos. She held beams in place, lifted heavy walls, blocked the wind with her body. Together, they fought the storm until the shelter stood strong. When it was over, they both collapsed inside, soaked and exhausted. He looked at her, his lips forming a tired smile. "Couldn't have done it without you," he said. She felt heat rise in her chest, a warmth she could not control. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever made her feel like she was part of something instead of apart from everything. That night, she sat near the fire, silent, watching the flames dance. He worked quietly beside her, drying his tools, humming softly again. She found herself leaning closer, not to attack, not to threaten, but simply to listen. His humming was low, calm, almost soothing, and she realized she wanted it to never stop. She did not know the word for what she was feeling. Her people had no name for it because they did not believe in it. But she knew it was dangerous, more dangerous than any weapon she had faced before. Because the more she stayed, the more she feared that leaving him would break something inside her that she could never fix again. One evening, as the firelight flickered, she finally spoke in a softer voice than she had ever used. "Why?" she asked. He looked up at her, puzzled. "Why do you not fear me?" Her voice almost cracked on the last word. He stared at her for a long moment, then answered simply, "Because I see you." The words struck deeper than any blade. She turned away quickly, Sal's hiding the shine in her eyes, her chest burning with emotions she could not name. She clenched her fists, trying to hold on to the fierceness that had always defined her. But no matter how hard she tried, his voice echoed in her mind. "Because I see you." From that moment on, something shifted. She was still fierce, still untamable in the eyes of the colony. But inside the shelter, she felt different. She was no longer a beast hiding in the dark. She was something more. Because one human had chosen to look at her and see beyond the fear. The peace they had found did not last. It never does. The hunters returned, this time not with nets and shock rifles alone, but with armored suits and heavy weapons. They had tracked her scent, followed the whispers through the colony, and now they stood outside the shelter like wolves surrounding a wounded deer. The human heard them first, the crunch of boots on gravel, the metallic clicks of weapons being prepared. He looked out the small window and saw shadows moving in the rain. She sensed it too. Her body tensed, her claws flexing. She had faced hunters before. She had killed them before. But now it was different. Now there was him, and she knew they would not spare him if they found her here. He moved quickly, shutting the lanterns, lowering the curtains, and reaching for a small weapon hidden under the table. It was nothing compared to what the hunters carried, just an old rifle with limited power. She laughed bitterly, a sharp sound in the darkness. "That will not save you." He turned to her, his eyes calm but firm. "It might buy time." She almost snarled at him. "You should run. They want me, not you." But he shook his head. "I won't leave you." Those words struck her harder than any bullet. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, the door shook with a heavy blow. Voices outside shouted, "Hand over the beast! Do it now, and we'll spare you!" Her chest tightened. This was it. This was the moment she had always known would come. She looked at him, expecting to see fear, expecting to see him open the door and give her away to save himself. But he stood tall, the rifle steady in his hands, his body between her and the door. The hunters forced their way in, the door flying open with a crash. Rain and shadows poured into the shelter. They aimed their weapons at him, ignoring her at first. "Step aside, human," one of them ordered. "You can walk away alive." But he didn't move. "No," he said. The hunter's helmet tilted. "Then you die with her." The first shot came like lightning. The human fired back, the recoil slamming into his shoulder. He stumbled, but he stayed upright. She could only stare for a heartbeat, frozen in shock. This fragile man was fighting for her. This human who had no chance against armored killers had chosen to bleed for her. Rage flooded her veins. The sound of his pain, the sight of blood at his side, broke something deep inside her. She roared, a sound that shook the walls, and launched herself into the fight. Her claws tore through metal, her strength crushed helmets and armor. The hunters screamed, but she heard nothing except the pounding of her own heart and the gasping breaths of the human behind her. She became the storm again, the untamable one, the terror of the colony. But this time it was not for her freedom. It was for him. Every strike, every kill was to protect the man who had stood for her when no one else would. When the last hunter fell, silence returned. The rain outside slowed, the thunder moved farther away. She stood in the middle of broken bodies, her chest heaving, her claws dripping. Slowly she turned back to him. He was slumped against the wall, blood staining his shirt, his face pale but still alive. She rushed to him, dropping to her knees. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Her hands, made for tearing and killing, now shook as they touched his wound. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this?" He gave a weak smile. "Because you're worth it." Her throat tightened. Worth it? No one had ever said that to her. She pressed her hands against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding, panic rushing through her like fire. She was not afraid of death, not of her own, but of his. The thought of losing him was unbearable. Through the night, she worked to keep him alive. She cleaned the wound, bound it with strips of cloth, and stayed by his side, never leaving, never resting. Each time his breathing grew shallow, she shook him, her eyes burning with desperation. "Stay alive, human. You cannot leave me." She thought of all the times she had mocked him, threatened him, tried to push him away. And yet, in this moment, all of it seemed meaningless. She realized the truth she had been avoiding. The bond that had formed between them was stronger than pride, stronger than fear. She did not want to be untamable anymore, not with him. When dawn came, he stirred weakly, his eyes opening just enough to see her. She was still there, her claws stained with both blood and dirt, her face marked with exhaustion. "You stayed," he whispered. She leaned closer, her voice trembling. "Always." The human gave a faint nod and closed his eyes again, drifting into rest. She sat beside him, her body aching, but her spirit stronger than ever. She had fought many battles, but none like this. This one was not against soldiers or hunters. It was against herself, her pride, her fear, her past. And she knew she had lost that fight the moment he stood in front of her, with nothing but a broken rifle and his courage. As she sat there watching over him, she finally understood the feeling she could never name. It was not weakness. It was not shame. It was something far more dangerous and far more powerful. It was the reason she had stayed in his shelter when the door was open. It was the reason she had fought harder than ever when he fell. It was the reason her heart now beat in rhythm with his. And though she would never admit it out loud, she knew it was the first time in her life she was not untamable. She had been claimed, not by chains or fear, but by a single human who had given her something she had never known before: worth. She sat beside him for hours, her sharp eyes never leaving his face. His breathing was uneven, his skin pale, but his chest still rose and fell. Every time he shifted or groaned, her claws twitched helplessly. She had healed herself from wounds worse than this, but with him it was different. His body was fragile, his blood weaker, his bones not made for war. She was terrified that one wrong move, one careless moment, would take him away from her. She pressed new cloth against his wound, changing it carefully, and every time he winced, she growled softly, hating that she could not take the pain away. She remembered his words from the night before, "Because you're worth it." They echoed in her mind over and over, burning deeper than any scar she carried. She had lived her whole life as a creature feared, hunted, hated. Now this one man had risked his life without hesitation, and she could not understand why. The door stood wide open, the path to freedom clear. She could leave now, vanish into the wild, return to her old ways. No one would stop her. But she did not move. She stayed, not as a prisoner, not because of chains, but because something in her refused to walk away. She thought of the moment she had leapt at the hunters, how her rage had turned into desperation the instant he was hurt. She thought of how her claws, made for killing, had instead pressed against his wound to save him. Something had changed in her, something she could not undo. When his eyes finally fluttered open again, she leaned closer, afraid he might slip away. He looked at her weakly, his lips forming a faint smile. "You're still here," he whispered. She nodded quickly, her voice trembling, though she tried to keep it strong. I will not leave you. He coughed softly, then closed his eyes again. She sat back, her chest heavy, and realized something she had never admitted before. She, the untamable one, had chosen to stay. She had chosen him. Through the long night, she guarded him like a beast guarding its only treasure. Every noise outside, every shift of shadow made her ready to fight again. But no hunters came. The colony was quiet. Perhaps they believed she had fled after the attack, or perhaps they feared her more than ever. Either way, she did not care. The only thing that mattered was keeping him alive. When morning came, she went out for the first time since the battle. The air was cold, carrying the smell of wet soil and smoke from distant fires. She searched the ruins of the hunters' camp and dragged back supplies, food, cloth, water, even medicine from their packs. She returned to the shelter quickly, her heart racing until she saw him still breathing. She treated his wound as best she could, using the stolen medicine, her hands surprisingly careful for someone built to destroy. Hours later, when he woke again, he watched her work. His eyes were weak but filled with something she had never seen before: trust. You're different, he murmured. She frowned. Different? He gave a faint nod. You could have left. You didn't. You could have let me die. You saved me. Her jaw tightened. She wanted to argue, to remind him she was still fierce, still untamed. But the words refused to come. Instead, she lowered her eyes and whispered, I don't understand you, human. You are weak. You bleed so easily. And yet, I cannot leave you. His lips curved in a tired smile. Then don't. Her heart thudded hard in her chest. Such simple words, yet they bound her stronger than any chain. She looked at him, at the fragile body she had once mocked, and saw something stronger than steel. Not in his muscles, not in his blood, but in his spirit. He had faced hunters without fear, had chosen her over his own safety, had bled for her. And that was a kind of strength her people had never known. That night, she sat close by as he rested. The fire flickered softly, shadows dancing across the walls. She should have been asleep, but her eyes stayed open, watching over him. Every so often, she would adjust the blanket over his body, making sure he stayed warm. Her claws, once used only for tearing, now moved with surprising gentleness. She realized she was not guarding him out of debt or duty. She was guarding him because she wanted to. When he stirred again, half awake, he whispered, You're not untamable. The words struck her deeply. She had built her whole identity on being wild, feared, and unstoppable. Yet hearing him say that did not make her angry. It made her feel seen. She leaned closer, her voice low, almost trembling. Maybe I am only untamable to others, not to you. He reached weakly for her hand. She hesitated, her claws dangerous, but then slowly let his hand rest against her palm. His touch was warm, fragile, but steady. She closed her eyes, holding on to that moment like it was the only thing keeping her alive. As dawn crept across the horizon, she realized the truth she had tried to deny for so long. Chains had never held her. Walls had never trapped her. What bound her now was her own choice. She had chosen him, and no force in the colony could tear her away. She sat taller, her glowing eyes scanning the horizon through the small window. If the hunters came again, she would be ready. She would fight, not for her pride or her freedom, but for him. For the human who had shown her that strength was not always about claws and blood, but about trust, sacrifice, and the courage to stay. And so, for the first time in her life, she accepted something she had never thought possible. She was no longer untamable. She was his, by her own choice, her own will, and that made her stronger than she had ever been before. The colony whispered when they saw her again. For so long, she had been a shadow of terror, a wild creature they believed could never be controlled. She had been their nightmare, their warning to children, their proof that some beings were too dangerous to live among them. But now she walked through the colony with her head high, her glowing eyes calm, and a human at her side. People hid at first. Doors shut, curtains fell, voices hushed. They expected her to attack, to roar, to remind them of her violence. Instead, she carried supplies in her arms, heavy crates balanced with ease, and placed them where they were needed. The human walked with her, speaking quietly, showing her what to do. She obeyed, not with fear, not with force, but with choice. That was what made the colony stare in disbelief. Children peeked from behind fences, their small eyes wide. She caught them watching and expected them to scream or run. Instead, they stayed, silent but curious. She remembered the old days, when she might have bared her teeth to scare them. But now, for reasons she could not name, she simply stood tall, her expression steady. The humans smiled at the children, and slowly, one or two dared to wave. To her shock, she felt no anger, only a strange warmth deep inside. The leaders of the colony were not pleased. They gathered in the central hall, their voices sharp, demanding answers. She cannot stay. She has killed before. She is dangerous. They reminded everyone of the destruction she had caused, the soldiers she had fought, the chaos she had left in her path. They demanded the human release her into their custody. But the human stood firm, just as he had before. He faced them with calm eyes and steady words. She is not a prisoner. She is not a beast. She is here because she chooses to be. His voice carried across the hall, echoing against the walls. Some leaders shouted back, calling him reckless. Others fell silent, their eyes shifting toward her, watching how she stood. She did not snarl, did not lash out. She only looked back at them, her glowing gaze unflinching, and for the first time, they saw no monster, only strength under control. Whispers spread across the colony. The untamable one had changed. No chains, no cages, no weapons had ever held her, yet a single human had done what no force could. He had given her trust, and she had chosen loyalty in return. At night, when they returned to the shelter, she sat by the fire and thought about everything. She had fought many battles, but this was the strangest one. She had not been defeated by weapons or captured by hunters. She had been tamed, not with chains, but with kindness. And though she hated the word tamed, she could not deny the truth. She was no longer alone. She watched him as he worked by the fire, repairing his old rifle, his face tired but peaceful. She thought of all the times she had tested him, threatened him, tried to scare him away. Yet he had never run. He had never raised a hand against her. Instead, he had stood between her and death, bleeding for her, protecting her when he had no reason to. She remembered his words. "Because I see you." No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever looked at her and seen more than a beast. Her chest tightened as she realized how much he had changed her. She was still fierce, still powerful, but no longer untamable. She had chosen to stay with him, to protect him, to fight for him. That choice gave her strength she had never known. The colony continued to watch from a distance. Some still feared her, others began to believe. Slowly, she became part of their world. She carried heavy loads when others could not. She guarded the gates at night, her sharp eyes seeing threats long before anyone else. She was still fierce, but her fury now had purpose. The people who had once cursed her name now whispered thanks when she passed. One evening, a group of young men from the colony approached the shelter. They bowed their heads slightly to the human, then turned to her. Their voices shook as they spoke. We are sorry for what we said, for how we feared you. We did not understand." She stared at them, her claws flexing unconsciously. In the past, she might have laughed, mocked them, reminded them of their weakness. But she did none of that. She simply nodded once, her voice low. "Fear kept you alive. I do not blame you." The men exchanged glances, relief washing over their faces. They left, and for the first time she felt the strange weight of acceptance settling in her chest. Later that night, she sat outside, watching the stars above. The human came and sat beside her, silent at first. Then he said, "You don't have to stay if you don't want to. You are free." She turned her glowing eyes toward him, her voice steady. "I know, but I choose to stay." He looked at her, a quiet smile spreading across his face. That was enough. And so, the fiercest, untamable alien woman in the colony was no longer a wild legend whispered in fear. She became something greater. Not because she was captured, not because she was broken, but because one human had given her something no one else had: trust, choice, and worth. The people still called her fierce, still spoke of her strength, but now they also spoke of her loyalty. And when they saw her walking beside the human, guarding him with eyes sharp as fire, they realized the truth. She had not been tamed by chains, but by the power of her own decision. And deep in her heart, she knew this was the first time she had ever truly belonged. Not to a cage, not to a colony, but to a bond she had chosen with her own will.